Fired up, brother. I'm hooked up. All right, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Get these things turned on.
Switch on that. Oh, okay.
Okay, we on?
No.
No?
It's on. It's on.
It looks like so. All right, there we go. All right, good evening. I'm Brother Jake Jackson. I'm an attorney from DeLand, Florida. My wife and I have attended Bible Baptist Church in DeLand since 1994.
Amen.
And it's a very active evangelistic ministry, and we've learned a lot. I never preached on the street or passed out a gospel tract until I started attending that church. I don't know if any of you know Brother Jerry Sutek,
Yeah.
but we were on a trip with him out to some festival in Missouri, and we were, he gathers a crowd with his accordion. We're singing hymns, and we got done with a hymn, and he put his hand right in the middle of my back, and he shoved me forward, said, "Give me your testimony, Jake." So that was my first time street preaching, and yeah, well, praise the Lord. Anyway, so we have a ministry called Gospel Advocates, and basically what we do is try to encourage people to go out and minister to the lost, do some evangelism, public preaching, and distributing literature and all that kind of thing. So we try to be a help and encouragement to them, and also try to help equip them with knowledge about how the Constitution and the legal system works, and try to steer people clear of getting in trouble, and try to help sort of run interference for them when they do. We'll have people really from all over the country that'll call and say, well, we're trying to pass out tracts at a festival of some kind, or do this or that in public ministry, and have trouble with the local authorities because a lot of times the police and the city leaders don't know just what the law requires and what the Constitution requires, and it's my impression generally is that it's not that they hate the gospel or they hate Christians or they hate Jesus. It's just they don't know any better, and so I have the blessing of being able to contact the people that are in charge over there and point them to exactly where it says in the Supreme Court case law or in the statutes or whatever, to show them here's what is required, and that you have to allow these people to do this evangelism, in the public venue that they're seeking to do it in, and so that's a real blessing to be able to do that. We have a website, gospeladvocates.com. If you don't put the S on advocates, and you're not gonna find us. So it's gospeladvocates.com, and we have materials on there. I wrote a book called Public Evangelism Under the First Amendment, and I've meant to bring those with me and distribute some of those here. And I left them at home, and Brother Justin Whitland is attending this conference. He's from my local church, and he was going to bring them, and his plane is late. So when he gets here, we'll have some copies of that booklet. But we distribute it for free as part of our ministry. First of all, we have a PDF version of it that you can download along with any other materials that we have. You can go to the website, download the materials for free. Or you can just contact me by phone or by email, and we'll be happy to go ahead and send those materials. If they'll be a blessing to you and be a help to you, that's what they're there for. I also go around the country and put on First Amendment seminars or public evangelism seminars. We've had several churches that have not done any public ministry at all that have invited me in to talk to their congregation, try to get them motivated, first of all, to go out and do it, and give them enough information about how the law works to where they don't feel intimidated, they don't, they feel more comfortable getting out there and doing it and getting started. So that's a real blessing to get some people going with that. So that's what we do. The program that I normally put on, I'll start out real basic with, why do we evangelize in public and what to preach and how to preach and all that. And I don't think you all need the basics, so we'll have a short but kind of an advanced course for you tonight. I will say this, just talking about, dealing with the authorities and trying to steer clear of trouble. It helps a lot to understand what your rights are, and you need to understand that your rights are not absolute. The First Amendment guarantees the right of free speech. That doesn't mean that you get to say whatever you want to say, wherever you want to say it, however you want to say it, whenever you want to say it. We have that liberty in this country, but there's a tension between individual liberties and the authority of the government to govern. And so, we need to be aware of those parameters. But I will say this, that going out with the right attitude, with just going out with the right heart, have some humility, have some grace in your heart, that goes a long way to avoiding problems. The gospel message is confrontational to an extent, right? It confronts people with the fact that there's a holy God that is in a position to judge them, and it confronts them with the fact that they're not holy and that they need to be saved. You're guilty before God. You need a Savior. It's a message of love and grace and hope, but it's confrontational in the sense that it confronts people with the fact that they're sinners who need a Savior. Okay? So I don't have any problem with having that kind of confrontation, but if you go out there with an attitude looking to have a confrontation with people, and you're there just because you want to just do some rebuking, you're going to end up with more resistance than you would have if you just did it. The Bible says, "Speak the truth in love," and I think we can hold fast to the truth and still do it in a spirit of love and grace. The Bible says that our ministry is a ministry of reconciliation. So it's not a ministry of condemnation; it's a ministry of reconciliation. So we are inviting people in, and those sinners that you see out there doing what they do, those are the people that when they get saved, they're going to be our brothers and sisters, and we're going to have fellowship with them forever in heaven. And if we have that mindset rather than look at these rotten people, they belong in hell, I think that goes a lot further. So that's not the legal part of it, other than people sometimes bring on themselves opposition and trouble and confrontation just from an attitude. And so I just throw that out there for you. And another thing, just as a practical, and that's that we talk about some of the legal stuff, and I'm going to get into that. But there's also just practical things that are helpful for people out there doing public ministry. And one of them is just to be appropriate to the setting, be appropriate to the venue that you're in. I'll give you an example of how not to do that. We had a young man who I appreciate his zeal, but he pulled his pickup truck and he parked it right in front of a little outdoor cafe where people were eating lunch. He stood in the back of that pickup truck and as loud as he could started preaching, and I'm glad the gospel goes out whenever it goes out, but all he was doing was getting people aggravated, whether they weren't hearing the message. They were just being annoyed that they couldn't enjoy their lunch because somebody was shouting at them from 15 feet away. So, you know, it takes a little discernment, you know, of that. You don't have to be like that. So, anyway, so I want to talk to you about some of the constitutional issues that we have. You know, as you know, the First Amendment, among other things, protects our right to freedom of speech, and like all of our rights in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution limits what the government can do. It doesn't limit what private parties can do. So, you know, when again, we have a right of freedom of speech, but if you go into a restaurant, or you go into a mosque, or you go into a private business, and you just want to stand there and start interrupting people with your message, it's a glorious message, it's an important message, but you don't have a right to disrupt somebody else's business on their private property, to just do what you want to do. And they, as a property owner, have a right to restrict what you can do on their property. But the First Amendment restricts what the government can do. And so we'll look at what those parameters are. So first of all, when there's a restriction that the government has made, whether it's a city ordinance or some kind of policy, police officer telling you you can't do this or that, you know, that's the government telling you, trying to restrict your right of free speech. And when that happens, the court will, if it's challenged and it goes to court, this is how the court looks at it. The first question is it protected speech? Because not all speech is protected under the First Amendment. And so we don't have to worry, you know, if we're out there preaching the gospel, you know, clearly the gospel is you know, a religious message or a political message, or, you know, for us to want to persuade other people to a point of view, whether it's the gospel or anything else, that's something that is within the realm of the First Amendment. Some of the things that are not within the realm of the First Amendment would be things like obscenity, which, you know, we won't have anything to do with that. There's something called fighting words, which hopefully we're not engaged in that. And let me give you a definition of fighting words. And this is from the Supreme Court of the United States. Fighting words are those personally abusive epithets which, when addressed to the ordinary citizen, are, as a matter of common knowledge, inherently likely to provoke violent reaction. So it's a personal insult directed at an individual, and it's something that is so insulting and so outrageous that it's likely to cause a reaction. We don't have any cause going out there representing Jesus Christ and preaching the gospel to be pointing the finger at somebody and calling them names and that kind of thing. I mean, that's just there's just no call for that. But so that's what fighting words are, and you need to understand that if you are out there preaching the gospel or whatever, and somebody complains and they call the police cannot come and arrest you for disorderly conduct or breach of the peace just because somebody doesn't like what you're saying. Okay? But if in the course of doing what you're doing, and in my booklet I have an example of a case where there was a guy that went on a college campus, and he was insulting people. I guess I don't know why he did it that way. Maybe he wanted to draw a crowd, or maybe he just got wound up and got going. but the court said that the court went through the different things that he had said and said, well, this one, it was insulting, but it was just minor. That's not fighting words. And that one was just a general statement, and so it wasn't directed at an individual. That's not fighting words. But then there was some of what he said that they said, this is fighting words. You can't call people names like that and have that be protected speech. Well, I don't know how long the brother was out there preaching, but what happened was he ended up getting arrested for disorderly conduct, and the court ended up saying that because some of what he said was fighting words, that he did not have the right that the police had the right to go ahead and shut him down. If he hadn't done that, the police would have been wrong and he would have been right. And so it's an important thing to avoid fighting words. It's an easy thing to avoid fighting words. Just don't call people names and you're in good shape. There's another phrase that has been popularized in the last decade or two, which is called hate speech. And hate speech is, first of all, I don't know any definition for hate speech. I guess it's anything that anything that's offensive to someone, they call it hate speech. Okay, so you preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and somebody says, well, you're being hateful because you're saying that other religions are wrong, or you're saying that people are going to be judged for their sin, and that's so hateful of you. Hate speech is not a legal concept. It's not a constitutional concept. There are no court cases where a court says this was out of bounds because it was hate speech. In fact, just the opposite of that, the United States Supreme Court has said that speech that is here's a quote from a case called Mattel versus Tam. Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or any other similar ground is hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect the freedom to express the thought that we hate. So if somebody's out there saying something and that somebody else finds offensive, that is they can be offended. And people can take offense at anything, but it is not a reason for a police officer to make you stop. It's not a reason for you to be sued or to have any consequence just because somebody finds what you say is hateful. And the thing is, we say stuff out of love, and we just preach the truth in love, and people still accuse us of being hateful.
Right.
And and we're not. But so when you hear somebody talk about hate speech, understand that has nothing to do with your rights under the First Amendment. It has nothing to do with the court system. It is not something that just because somebody says this is they think it's hateful, that doesn't affect your right to express yourself. Another concept to understand is something called a heckler's veto, and that's where somebody that doesn't like what you're saying starts to try to cause a problem. They threaten violence. They start becoming disorderly because they don't like what you're doing. And it is wrong for the police to come and say, oh, we see that there's a reaction here, this is getting out of hand, you have to stop. No, what the police are supposed to do is come and say, they have to stop, or to let them know you have a right to continue doing what you're doing, and not allow a, quote, heckler's veto, where somebody that objects to the message shuts down the speaker. So, and another thing, sometimes, I've had a police officer come and say, well, we understand, we appreciate your right to preach what you want to preach, but what about all these other people out here that don't want to hear what you have to say. You know, you're violating their right to be free from your message that you're trying to provide. And that again is a totally wrong concept. People do not in a public forum, on a public park or public sidewalk, people do not have a right to be shielded or protected from the message of somebody that's out there preaching or trying to get a message across. The Constitution does not permit the government to decide which types of otherwise protected speech are sufficiently offensive to require protection for the unwilling listener or viewer. Rather, the burden normally falls upon the viewer to avoid further bombardment of his sensibilities simply by averting his eyes. So that's a quote from one of the Supreme Court cases where the question was, you know, somebody is in a public place and they have some speech that's offensive to someone else, and you know, isn't the government justified in arresting this person or making him stop or whatever because there's people that are being offended? And the Supreme Court said if someone's being offended, they can keep walking, they can turn away, they can, you know, it's up to them to avoid the message. Now, there's on the other side of that, you know, if you are trying to witness to somebody, trying to hand them a gospel tract, and they say, no thanks, I'm not interested, and you follow them down the sidewalk and say, wait a minute, you know, your soul is in danger, and you may have good motivation, you know, a good reason for wanting to do that, but then you're getting, you take yourself outside of the protection of the First Amendment. You know, at some point, you know, if you're just dogging their steps and badgering them when they've told you, you know, that they're not interested, they don't want to hear it, you ought to let them go. Again, we're not out there to make ourselves obnoxious. Yeah. We're out there to try to preach the truth in love. So anyway, so I guess I should look. I'm used to having a clock in the back where I make sure I don't go over my time or manage my time. Okay, so all right, not all government-owned property is a venue for you to exercise your right of free speech. Okay, and the court calls the places where we do have that right, or where that right is the most robust, is in what's called a traditional public forum, and that would be a public park, public sidewalk, public streets. Those are places where, because, you know, for centuries, people have gone to the public square and exchanged ideas and you know, tried to push for their message to be accepted, and there's a place of kind of public debate or public discourse, and those kinds of places are, it's called a traditional public forum, and that's where the government, it has to allow you to express yourself, and there are some restrictions that can be placed, but you need to understand that there's a difference between a public park and you know, your local city council building. Okay, it's owned by the government, it's government property, but you can't go in there with your banners and your tracts and disrupt city business, because it's not there as a public forum, it's there as a place of business for the city to conduct its business. So, you know, people get confused about that sometimes, and well, this is public property, so I can, you know, I can do what I want, and they can't stop me, and that's not true. So, one of the things, and I've got some materials. We've got a couple of handouts. One is evangelism at public festivals and events, and the other is handling police encounters during public evangelism. And so I invite you to pick those up during the break. At public events like an art show, an antique car show, things like that, you have thousands of people are drawn to the same place, and typically they'll do it in a public park, or they'll close off some of the streets to vehicle traffic, but they still let people walk in, and they set up their booths, and it was kind of like what we're doing here, this weekend. And it's a place where Christian evangelists like to go, because then you've got all these people together and you can get the message out. So we're motivated to go to events like this. The problem is that the people who sponsored the events, they went to the city or the county, they've paid a permit fee, they've received a permit to have this done, they put out whatever expense they have and for them to have this venue, and then they think that they're the owners of the venue for the weekend. They feel like almost like when you rent property, this is our property for the weekend, and sometimes that's the impression that they're under, and that's the impression that the police are under. But that's not the case. If they're having an event in a public venue like a public park, it is still, a public park is a traditional public forum. If they're having an event there, it's still a traditional public forum, as long as the public is invited, which that's the whole purpose of having it there, is if the public's invited and they're able to just come, free flow in and out of the venue. Now, when they put a fence around it and they have a gate, and you have to pay an entry fee or have a ticket to go in, that will change that park from a traditional public forum into a private, a non-public forum for that event. But most of them don't do that, because they're trying to get as many people as they can to their event. So they don't charge admission, they don't restrict who can there. They want all of the public to be there. Well, we're the public too, and we have the right to be there, and we don't lose our First Amendment rights just because there's an event going on in the streets or the sidewalks or the parks. Now, there are some restrictions, and again, here's where people need to understand that your rights are not absolute. If someone has, say there's a gay pride event at a public park, and the public is invited, they've got speakers and acts and things going on. They've got a stage and a PA system and everything. If you go in there and you have your bullhorns and you are preaching so loud that they can't do their event, then the police can make you stop, or they can kick you out. Even though it's a traditional public forum, they have the right to have their event go on. So we can go in there and we can pass out tracts, and we can go in there and we can talk to people, and there's places where we're able to preach, but we can't shout them down. We cannot interfere with what they're doing. We can't stand in front of their booths and not let people go to what they're doing. Then we're interfering with their rights. So it's an important thing to understand how that works with these public festivals and events. But that is the most common problem area that I see, where I get calls from all over the country. Well, we wanted to go into this art festival, and they said we couldn't do it, and so you can. And if you're going to do that, and you have something like this in your pocket, then if the police come and confront you about it, say, well, we've got this is our understanding. This is First Amendment law that says we have the right to be here. There's no gate that we had to pay an entry fee at, and so we're able to do this, and we've had a lot of success with just with this little bit of information. Makes the difference between the police telling them they have to leave or they're going to be arrested, you know, when the police get this, you know, presented to them, then they all of a sudden they backpedal and say, okay, well, I guess you can do what you want to do. So, all right. So what the courts do is they look at, first of all, to confirm this is protected speech, and then they look at, is this a traditional public forum or not? And one thing you need to understand about sidewalks, and in the booklets that I've got, and again, I encourage you to get a copy. I go into some more detail about this, but not every sidewalk is a public sidewalk, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you have a business that owns their property all the way to the street, and there's a sidewalk that goes across it, and they say, well, we own the sidewalk. Well, maybe they own the dirt under the sidewalk, but the fact is, if it functions as a sidewalk that lets the public go along the street from one side of their property to the other side of their property, that's going to be considered a public venue, okay? On the other hand, if there's a sidewalk on their private property, typically, like you have a Walmart and they have a sidewalk right in front of the Walmart. Okay, well, that's all within the Walmart property. That is private property. But the sidewalk that's out by the road at the edge of their parking lot, that's a public sidewalk. So you need to understand the difference from one to another, because you don't want to tell the police, I'm going to stand on my rights. This is a public sidewalk, when it's not. Then I just don't want you to be wrong and make the wrong decision there. So the next thing that the courts look at is whether the restriction on the speech was content-based or content-neutral. Okay, when a court is evaluating a law or a government action or a policy that's being challenged as a First Amendment violation of free speech, then the court needs to determine, is this a traditional public forum or not, in order to apply, and whether it's content-based or content-neutral or not, in order to determine what the legal standard is for the court to evaluate that restriction on your right to free speech. If it is a content-based restriction, then the court applies what's called strict scrutiny. In other words, they say, in order to uphold this ordinance, we're going to apply a very stringent legal test to determine whether it's going to be constitutional or not. And the test is whether it's necessary to serve a compelling state interest and narrowly drawn to achieve that end. So basically, if they're going to restrict speech for some, based on the content of the speech, they have to come up, the government, the city or the county, whatever it is, they have to defend that speech, and they have to have defend that ordinance, and they have to show that it was necessary for a compelling state purpose, and in order for it to be valid. And the courts have said that content-based regulations are presumptively invalid. In other words, if they're saying you can come here and you can hold signs as long as the signs don't have anything to do with religion, that would be a content-based restriction. So and if they do that, the courts have said that that's going to be struck down. That's going to be invalid in almost every case. On the other hand, if it is a content-neutral restriction on speech, they apply what they call intermediate scrutiny instead of strict scrutiny. It's a less stringent standard for the court to review, whether it's a valid restriction on your right of free speech. And what that standard is, it has to be a reasonable time, place, or manner restriction that's narrowly tailored to serve a significant state interest, and it has to leave open ample alternative channels of communication, which is a lot of legalese, I guess, and in the booklet we go into a pretty good depth about that. But I'll give you an example. For a noise ordinance, for example, they'll usually, without reference to the content of what the messages are, they'll have a noise ordinance that says you can't be louder than a certain number of decibels measured from a certain number of feet away. So it has nothing to do with who's speaking or what their message is. The question is, how loud are they? All right. So that normally is a content neutral restriction, and so the courts are a lot more likely to say, yeah, they can have a noise ordinance that restricts your volume, as opposed to something that would be referenced towards what the message is. But even with noise ordinances, sometimes they end up being determined by the courts to be content-based, because many times the legislative body, the city council or whatever it is that passes a noise ordinance, very often they will have exceptions to the noise ordinance. That this is the standard that's going to apply, but we're not going to apply it to, and then they'll have a list of things that are exceptions to it. And so now there has to be an evaluation of who's speaking, who's making the noise, and what are they saying, and that can turn a content neutral regulation into a content-based regulation, and then the court says, well, you can't have this, we have to strike it down. So that's that happens actually pretty frequently. So and again, we go into more detail on this in the book. Also, sometimes a noise ordinance will have terms like unnecessary or disturbing noises are prohibited. Well, okay, well, how do we determine what's necessary or unnecessary, or how do we determine what's disturbing? Well, a lot of times that it kind of invites an evaluation of, well, what was being said. And so now we're looking at what turns out to be a content-based restriction instead of a content-neutral one. So, anyway, there are. I know I've got to take care of my time here. So let me go ahead and move on to what I think is one of the most important things that I wanted to convey to you, and that's how to handle encounters with the police, because it's something that happens very frequently, and people will call me and they'll tell me about something that happened, and it'll be apparent that the police have violated their rights, but the way the situation was handled, it's not established, it's not crystal clear that the rights were violated or not. And so here's what I would recommend. And I think this is one of the handouts that we have here, so I encourage you to get those. But it helps, especially if you've had a problem in a particular place with the police saying something and just misunderstanding the law, or if you're going to a new place and you've never been there before, and you have some reason to expect that there's likely to be a conflict, or sometimes if it's just a place that's never had public ministry before, it's likely somebody's going to complain, and then you're going to be dealing with a police officer at some point. So it's good to be prepared before you go, and you can try to resolve some issues ahead of time. You can also contact me. That's part of what I do in my ministry is I will look up the ordinances. I will contact the city officials or whatever if there's a concern. But sometimes it's good to contact the local officials ahead of time. Never ask for permission. Okay, you can contact them and say, I want to give you a heads up. We're going to do this ministry in your town. This is what we're anticipating doing, and you give them assurances. We understand the law. We understand our rights under the First Amendment. We know that there are things that we cannot do. We're not going to be blocking the sidewalk. We're not going to be disrupting traffic. We're not going to be, causing a problem for you. But we want to let you know this is what we're going to be doing, and then ask them, is there anything from your end that we need to be aware of? If you ask them permission, you say, we'd like to do this. Is that okay? Whoever it is that's going to be on the other end of that phone call or the other end of that email, you're giving them the impression, first of all, that you need their permission and therefore that they can say no. And a lot of times it's someone who they don't want to be the person that said, yes, go ahead, you can do this, and then get in trouble with their superiors somehow. And so the easiest thing for them to do is just say no, or more often they would say, well, we'll have to check on this and get back to you. So I don't want you to ask for permission. Just give them a heads up. But you can, if you look up the ordinances. For example, I looked up the New Orleans ordinances ahead of this event, and in particular, I wanted to see, what it said about distributing literature, what it said about noise restrictions and that kind of thing. And I was very surprised to see that the New Orleans City Code has, many of them, like many cities do, they have restrictions on volume, and they have restrictions on use of loudspeakers or bullhorns, amplification equipment. And this ordinance, what I was surprised to see was that it gives an exception to evangelistic. Let me find the words of the ordinance here, but it gives an exception for the preaching of the gospel or of evangelism. It doesn't specifically say the gospel, but it does give. I thought I had highlighted it here, where I'd be able to tell you real quick. Here we go. Any outdoor evangelistic endeavor conducted by a bona fide tax-exempt religious organization or by a duly authorized representative thereof between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. These are exempted from the other provisions. And so that's great that there's an exemption. Now, I can tell you that is an unconstitutional content-based ordinance, that they can't say everybody else has to abide by these volume rules or abide by these amplification rules, but if your message is, evangelism, and you're from a church or a bona fide tax-exempt religious organization, then it doesn't apply to you. Then really it's unconstitutional. They shouldn't be able to enforce it against anybody. And so, what do you do if you want to do evangelism, but you're not part of a church that is a tax-exempt religious organization? Well, do it anyway. And first of all, they're probably not going to even ask, but they can't distinguish. There's no way for them to be able to justify that you don't have to have a permit for amplification if you're from a tax-exempt religious organization, but you do have to have a permit if you're not. So there's that wouldn't be a valid distinction. But anyway, so we're good to go as far as that's concerned. They do have restrictions, some restrictions on distributing literature, But one of the exceptions to that is if you hand the literature to a person who's willing to receive it, then that's fine. And so, you know, you can't tackle somebody and shove it in their pocket, but you offer them a gospel tract like we normally do, and if they take it, then, you know, then you're within the law. But it's good to look those things up. Thank you, brother. It's good to look those things up and take with you a copy of the ordinance if there's, you know, or, you know, we've had questions and emailed the city attorney. The police have given this group a problem with this. We want your assurance. Can you give me something in writing that shows that my client has the right to do what they're doing and that they don't need a permit? And the city attorney writes back to me, your clients do not need a permit. And so now I can give that to the people and say, here you go. If the cop comes and says you have to have a permit for this, you have it from the city attorney's office that no, you don't. So it's good to do that. But the most important things about the police encounters are, number one, have somebody video record what's going on, the interaction. Have one person deal with the police and one person video record. And if you have a larger group of people, don't crowd around the officers. We don't want to give them any reason to feel threatened. And ask them specifically what law or ordinance is it that prohibits us from doing this here. If they won't be reasonable with you, ask to speak to a supervisor. Most law enforcement departments have a policy that if someone asks to speak to a supervisor, they've got to call a sergeant or a lieutenant or somebody to come and deal with you. And usually those people are a lot better educated and a lot you know, they have a better understanding of what your rights are. And most important, ask them specifically, are you telling us that you will arrest us if we continue to preach or if we continue to distribute our literature or whatever? And you have to ask them that question and get them to answer it. And the reason for that is sometimes after the fact, you know, we go and talk to the chief of police or the city attorney or whatever, and they say, well, they weren't ordering your people to stop. They were just making a suggestion. So we want to make it clear, is this a command that is violating my rights, or is this just a request which it's within my rights to ignore? So you need to ask them, are you telling me if we don't stop that we're going to be arrested or that we're going to be prosecuted? And a lot of times what'll happen when you ask that question is you'll get all kinds of backpedaling from the police. You know, no, we're not saying that you know that we're going to arrest you. We're just asking if you would, you know, it seems to us the Christian thing to do would be to stop doing what you're doing because it's bothering somebody else. And so be polite with them, but you know, you don't have to stop immediately if they come in and they want to have a conversation with you. You can have a conversation. You don't just have to automatically shut down and be afraid to talk to them about it and you know, or get their superiors to come out and deal with it. So I don't know if do we have time for questions and answers now? Okay. All right. So if anybody has any questions, or try to do that now, and also during the break, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. Yes, sir.
So today, someone gave me one of those bullhorn PA systems. So you're telling me I can use that, and did anyone else bring one? I'm just curious if somebody else is going to be using it. Multiple people have.
Yeah.
Okay to do.
Yeah. So yeah, you are clear to use amplification. That's fine. And again, you know, depending on where you end up setting up, you know, louder isn't always better. So you know, again, you just have to be sensitive to what's going on around you. But as far as your legal right, yes, you have the right to use
Can
amplification.
you correct him and tell him it's not a bullhorn, it's a true horn because no bull comes
Amen.
out?
I like that.
That's
All right. Very good. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
A free speech area on campus. Do we really have to get permission to go on a certain hour, certain times at mine? They say I do and I've done in the past, but why can't I, it's a public institution, can I just walk around?
Right, that's a very good question. The question is,
Please, we
yeah,
didn't hear it.
yeah, the question was, going on a college campus, and they have free speech, designated free speech zones, and you have to go and get a permit to do all that. All right, first of all, a college campus is not a traditional public forum. So it's an educational institution. If it's a public university, it's owned by the state or owned by the public, but it's for a specific purpose, which is for education. And different places have different laws. In Florida, we have a law that says any public university in Florida, any of the green common areas are considered a traditional public forum, and people can use that. People from outside the university can go on campus and use that. But most states don't have a law like that. So it's not a traditional public forum. That doesn't mean you have no rights, whatever there. And so if they've opened up the university to access by the public, but they have restrictions on that, then the court is going to have to do an evaluation of those restrictions, and including the requirement to get a permit. That's a restriction on speech. Having to do in specific areas, that's a restriction on speech. And so those would have to be evaluated, based on exactly what the restrictions are, and if the way they're written, if they would be content neutral or content based.
Why did they submit the particular tracks?
Okay, so yeah, if they're asking you to submit your literature for some kind of approval, it depends on again how it's written. That makes it sound more like an invalid content-based restriction. That it may be that they can restrict you to a certain area of the campus, but if they're saying we need to pre-approve what the speech is that you're trying to convey, that most likely would be held to be unconstitutional. And so I'll be glad to talk to you about that afterwards, or we can I can get with me later and see if I might be able to help with that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Okay, so in areas where you are clearly allowed to do that, what about setting up a table to have literature, gospel tracts, Bibles, things like that?
Well, that would be, if you go into a public park and you want to put up a table and do that, unless there's a specific, if there's an ordinance that or a park rule that restricts that, I would have to look at the specific rule. As a general rule, if there's not already an ordinance or a park rule that says you can't do that, then you can do it. If it would be different though if it's a permitted event, if somebody is having some kind of festival in a park, you can't go and set up a table and have your literature within their festival area. And the idea behind that is that they have a right under the First Amendment to control the message that they are presenting. Same thing with a parade. That there was a Supreme Court case where there was a St. Patrick's Day parade, Irish festival parade that was going on, and there was an Irish gay and lesbian group that wanted to have their float in the parade, and the parade organizers would not allow them to do it, and that went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that the organizers of the parade have a First Amendment right to control the message of the parade, and so they don't have to let anybody else, whether it's a gay pride group or whether it's an evangelism group, they don't have to let just anybody in the parade and present any message that they want, because they have a right to control the message of the parade. So it's this the same kind of question. Yes, sir.
I mean, like, but you're not allowed to impede traffic or flow of traffic. What about, like, my hometown got really wide sidewalk?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a very good point. You cannot, and in fact, in New Orleans, there's a specific ordinance also that says and most places do, that you cannot block the sidewalks. That doesn't mean that you can't stand there and use part of the sidewalk, or a great big broad sidewalk and there's room for a table, as long as you're not impeding the flow of people walking by, that shouldn't be a problem. Or just put the table right next to the sidewalk, and have it there available. But yeah, you can't, and in fact, even when you have a large group of people and you go out and hold signs, at an intersection or something, you got to be careful that you leave room for people to walk, to use the crosswalks and get by you. So, yes, sir. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir, in the back.
We were talking about sometimes markets. We have markets that we go to that technically they could be construed as public, but there are times when they'll have security people and they will say that they're private. I mean, is that legitimate in some cases?
Well, is it what is it in a park?
No, it's I mean, like cross streets, and I mean you got blocks of shops, but it's all public thoroughfare.
Okay. Well, if it's, you have the right to be on the, on the sidewalk or on the right of way of those streets, even if they've got tables outside and they're selling whatever it is that they're selling, you still have a right to be there. And, so as far as, it would be a traditional public forum if it's a public sidewalk along the street. So, you would have the right to be there and to distribute your literature or do what you're doing. A security guard, when it comes right down to it, the worst that they can do is call the police. All right, and so because a security guard can't arrest you, or they can't make you move on. So, and we've had lots of situations where we're dealing with a security guard and they threaten to call the police, and we say, go ahead. The police are going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you. We have a right to be here, and we have a right to do this. And when the police come, then you're dealing with a government authority that has to respect your First Amendment rights, and you're in a public place, and and you're not doing anything that you don't have a right to do. So, yeah.
Over the years, I've dealt with a couple of incidences where I've been inside permitted areas where there was no gate or cost, and twice I won that argument. But I got arrested once for being inside a cordoned off area that was under a permit with the city, and it was thrown out. But I had another example a year ago in Roswell where they cordoned off a section of the city center, and they claimed that they owned the sidewalks, the right to the sidewalks, and we stood on the sidewalks. Police eventually come up and straighten it out, but I've run into that where you get inside a permitted area where it isn't gated, or no cost to access, where you'll be pushed back on because we got a permit. Have you dealt with that?
Yeah, we deal with that. We deal with that all the time. That's what I was saying. Is that's the most common problem that we see. The question was, in a permitted event, that someone goes in and tries to evangelize within the permitted area, and they end up being told that they can't do it, and you have to go across the street, or you have to go someplace else. And so, yeah, normally they are not within their rights to tell you that you can't be there. If it's open to the public, you're part of the public, and you have the right to be there. And as long as you're not disrupting their event, or you're not preventing them from doing what they are doing there, they just have to tolerate, that you're there with your own message. So yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. Okay.
Let's get ready to take a break.
All right.
Just hold on one second. Okay, so.
All right.
Man, that was good stuff. So right behind you on that table by the car seat, the baby seat, there's Brother Jake's books in that box. And there's also the handout papers that he was talking about. Also, we have Brother John Combs with us. I'm not sure how many of y'all know him, but he was right there with the video camera set up. What he's doing a street preaching documentary, okay? So he's going to be recording us while we're on the streets. He's recorded several other churches and preachers in various parts of the country, but he's come down here specifically to record us while we're on the streets, and also he's going to interview several of us for a small interview, answering some questions regarding the public ministry. So he has a paper back there I've just brought up here to show you. I'm going to put it on my table right there. If you're interested, once the documentary is complete, if you would like him to send you a copy of it, just put your name, state, address there, city and state, and then your email. And then once that's completed, he'll send it over. It's a documentary to encourage other individuals, other Christians, to get involved in public ministry. So I think it's a great idea. So we'll take a 15-minute break. I have bottled waters in the ice chest, 2 ice chests right there. All those snacks are free as the Lord provides. And we'll take 15 minutes, come back at 8 o'clock, and we'll have Brother Tory Carter on the history of street preaching. Amen? Amen. Thank you.
Air conditioning, air conditioning. Air conditioning. What's that?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Thank you.